The gunshot that killed my intended partner echoed across Red Hollow 3 days before our wedding. When the dust settled, a scarred stranger rode into my yard carrying a blood-stained contract and a proposal I couldn't refuse. My mind was dying. Corrupt officials wanted my land, and this man, Cade Varon, claimed he'd bought the right to stand beside me. The town waited for me to break. They didn't know I'd already survived worse than their whispers. But marrying a killer to save everything I'd built? That was a gamble even I wasn't sure I could win. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Red Hollow's excuse for a depot, and Lena Zhao stepped down into dust thick enough to choke on. Her boots, leather, practical, bought in Sacramento with money she couldn't afford to spend, hit the ground with a soft thud that nobody noticed. The town sprawled before her like a wound that wouldn't heal. Crooked buildings leaning into each other, mud streets carved with wagon ruts, and the metallic stink of ore dust mixing with horse manure and human desperation. She'd expected rough. She'd prepared for rough. She hadn't prepared for this. Miss Zhao? A boy, maybe 14, dirt smeared across his freckled face, approached with her trunk balanced on his shoulder. You the one owns the Brightwater claim? I am. Lena pulled her gloves tighter, a habit when she needed to feel in control. Where's Mr. Chen's office? The boy's face went carefully blank. Chen's dead, ma'am. 3 days now. The words hit like a fist to the stomach, but Lena's expression didn't change. She'd learned young that showing weakness invited wolves. Dead how? Shot. The boy shifted the trunk. In the back. They found him outside the assayer's office with his pockets turned out. He paused, then added with the casual cruelty of a child repeating adult gossip. Folks say he owed money to the wrong people. Lena's mind raced. James Chen had been her partner, on paper at least. A businessman from San Francisco with mining connections and enough capital to keep the Brightwater claim operational while she learned how to extract silver from stubborn rock. Without him, she had a failing mine, mounting debts, and a town full of men who'd been waiting for her to fail since the day she'd arrived 6 months ago. Where's the claim office? 2 streets over, next to the saloon. Can't miss it. The boy hesitated. Ma'am, you got someone meeting you? Ain't safe for a woman alone, especially with the Taggart boys in town. I'll manage. Lena took her smaller bag from the coach driver and pressed a coin into the boy's free hand. Take the trunk to the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher's expecting me. She walked toward the claim office with her spine straight and her gaze forward, aware of every eye that tracked her movement. A Chinese woman in a frontier mining town drew attention like blood in water. Most of it wasn't friendly. The claim office was exactly where the boy had said, a weathered building with a hand-painted sign that had faded to near illegibility. Lena pushed through the door and found herself facing a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same hard rock as the mountains surrounding them. 50-ish, with gray stubble and eyes that had seen too much and cared about too little. Help you? He didn't look up from the ledger he was writing in. I'm Lena Zhao. I own the Brightwater claim. I need to know the status of my partnership agreement with James Chen. That got his attention. He set down his pen and studied her with the slow, evaluating gaze of a man weighing livestock. Chen's dead. So I heard. The agreement specified that in the event of his death, his share would transfer to his designated heir. I need to know who that is so I can... Already transferred. The clerk pulled a folder from beneath the counter and flipped it open. Contract was reassigned 2 days ago, legal and binding. Lena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Reassigned to whom? Cade Varon. The clerk's mouth twisted into something that might have been amusement or contempt. Hard to tell. He bought Chen's share of the claim, along with the partnership terms. All of them. The room felt smaller suddenly. That's not possible. The contract required my approval for any transfer of shares. Clause 7, subsection 3. In the event of death by violence or misadventure, shares may be sold to settle outstanding debts without partner approval. The clerk turned the folder toward her. Chen owed Varon money, quite a bit of it, from what I understand. This was the settlement. Lena stared at the documents, her mind cataloging details, even as panic tried to claw its way up her throat. The signatures looked legitimate. The dates were correct. And there, in black ink that might as well have been blood, was a clause she'd overlooked when she'd been desperate enough to sign anything that would keep the mine operational. "Who is Cade Varon?" The clerk leaned back in his chair, and now the expression was definitely amusement. "You'll find out soon enough. He's expecting you at the Brightwater. Said to tell you he'd be there at sundown." He paused. "Word of advice, Miss Zhao. Varon's not a man you want to cross. If I were you, I'd sell him your half of the claim and get back on that stagecoach." Lena gathered the papers with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't. "I didn't come here to sell. I came here to work." "Your funeral." She left the office and stood in the street, trying to breathe around the tightness in her chest. The Brightwater claim was 3 miles outside town, accessible by a road that was more suggestion than thoroughfare. She had maybe 2 hours before sundown, not enough time to plan, barely enough time to think, but enough time to get there first. The Brightwater claim sprawled across a shallow valley between 2 ridges of pine and exposed rock. Lena had bought it with everything she had, money saved from years of working in her uncle's import business in San Francisco, money borrowed from friends who'd tried to talk her out of this madness, money she'd promised to repay with interest that now seemed laughably optimistic. The main house was small but solid, built by the previous owner with actual craftsmanship instead of the hasty carpentry that characterized most of Red Hollow. A barn stood 50 yards away, listing slightly but still functional. Between them, the mine entrance gaped like a mouth in the hillside, timber supports visible in the fading light. Lena walked through the house, checking windows and doors with the systematic thoroughness she'd learned from her father. Lock the doors, know your exits, trust no one until they've earned it. The house was as she'd left it, sparse furniture, a kitchen that smelled faintly of the bread she'd baked 3 days ago, a bedroom with a bed frame and mattress and nothing else. She'd been living here for 6 months, and it still looked temporary. Probably because some part of her had never believed she'd succeed. She was standing in the kitchen, staring at Chen's partnership papers spread across the table, when she heard the horse. One rider, approaching at an easy pace. Lena moved to the window and watched a man dismount in the yard with the fluid economy of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. Cade Varon. Had to be. He was tall, rangy in the way of men who carried muscle without bulk. Dark hair that needed cutting. A face that might have been handsome before something, or several somethings, had carved lines of violence into it. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. He wore a gun on his hip with the casual familiarity of a man who'd used it and would again. Lena opened the door before he could knock. They studied each other in the failing light. Up close, Varon's eyes were gray, cold as winter stone. He held a saddlebag in one hand and a rolled document in the other. "Miss Zhao." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "We need to talk." "We don't need to do anything." Lena kept her hand on the doorframe, ready to slam it if necessary. Foolish, probably. A door wouldn't stop a man like this. But it made her feel less helpless. "You bought a dead man's contract. That doesn't give you the right to walk onto my property." "It's my property too, 50% of it." Varon didn't move closer, but he didn't retreat either. "Chen owed me $8,000. This claim is how he paid it." 8,000. Lena felt sick. He never mentioned a debt. He mentioned a lot of things that weren't true. Varon's gaze swept the yard, the house, the dark mouth of the mine. "How much silver are you pulling out of that hole?" "That's none of your business." "It's exactly my business. I own half." He finally looked back at her. "I've seen the assayer reports. You're barely breaking even. Another month, maybe 2, and you'll be out of money. Then the bank forecloses, Taggart buys the claim at auction, and you go home with nothing." The fact that he was right made it worse. "So what do you want? To force me to sell?" "No." Varon stepped closer, and Lena's hand tightened on the doorframe. "I want to make the partnership work." She laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. "You're a gunfighter. What do you know about mining?" "Nothing, but I know about men like Taggart." Varen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something hard and certain. He's been running this town for 5 years, controls the assayer, half the claims, and most of the sheriff's office. He wants your land because there's a vein running under it that connects to his mine. He's been waiting for you to fail so he can take it cheap. How do you know that? Because I know men like him, and I know you can't fight him alone. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need help, didn't need a partner, especially not one who looked like he'd killed more men than she'd met in her entire life. But she'd spent 6 months watching the mine bleed money while Taggart's men made offers that sounded like threats, and the town waited for her to break. "What do you want?" she asked again, quieter this time. Varen pulled out the rolled document and handed it to her. Chen's contract included a marriage clause. You needed a husband to satisfy the territorial laws about women owning claims. He was supposed to fill that role. Lena's stomach dropped. She'd signed that contract in desperation, banking on Chen being a paper husband, a name on documents, nothing more. "That's not legal." "Yes, it is. I checked." Varen's tone was flat, businesslike. "You need a husband. I need a legitimate claim to this land. We marry, work the mine together, and when Taggart comes, and he will come, we're in a stronger position to fight him. You want to marry me for a mining claim. I want to marry you so neither of us loses everything." Varen shifted his weight, and Lena caught the glint of metal at his hip. "I'm not asking for a real marriage, separate rooms, separate lives, but on paper and in public we're partners, equals." "Why?" Lena searched his face for any hint of deception. "Why do you care about this claim?" For the first time, something flickered across Varen's expression, something that might have been pain or anger or exhaustion. It was gone before she could name it. "Because I'm tired of running," he said, "and this is the first place in 10 years that might be worth staying for." The sun had slipped below the ridge, painting the sky in shades of rust and ash. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Lena thought about the stagecoach that would leave tomorrow morning, thought about the debts waiting in San Francisco, thought about 6 months of backbreaking work and the mine that held silver she could almost taste. "If I agree to this," she said slowly, "we do it my way. I run the mine. You handle security. We split profits equally, and either of us can dissolve the partnership with 30 days' notice." Varen nodded. "Agreed. And if you touch me without permission, I'll put a bullet in you myself." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Fair enough." Lena stepped back and opened the door wider. "The preacher's in town. We can do this tomorrow." "Tonight." Varen picked up his saddlebag. "Taggart's men have been watching this place. The longer we wait, the more time they have to make a move." He was right. Lena hated that he was right. "Fine. Tonight." She gestured toward the barn. "Put your horse up. I'll get the papers ready." Varen walked past her into the gathering dark, and Lena closed the door with hands that shook despite her best efforts. She'd come to Red Hollow to build something, to prove she was more than the quiet niece who kept books and poured tea. Now she was marrying a stranger with a killer's eyes to save a dream that might already be dying. She looked at the partnership papers spread across the table and wondered which mistake would destroy her first, trusting Cade Varen or not trusting him enough. Opact. They rode into Red Hollow as the last light bled from the sky. Varen on his horse, Lena on the bay mare she'd bought with her last spare cash. They didn't speak. The silence between them felt less like companionship and more like two people trapped in the same bad decision. The preacher lived above the general store, in a room that smelled of candle wax and old hymnals. He was a thin man with nervous hands and a voice that stuttered when Varen looked at him too long. "Marriage," he said, glancing between them. "Tonight." "Tonight," Lena confirmed. She'd changed into her only good dress, dark blue wool that made her look older than 26. "Is that a problem?" No problem." The preacher pulled out a worn Bible and a certificate that had clearly been used before, the previous name scratched out and replaced. "Do you have witnesses?" "We'll make do without," Varen said. The ceremony lasted maybe 3 minutes. Lena spoke her vows in a voice that didn't waver, even though her hands were cold and her heart hammered against her ribs. Varen's responses were quiet, almost inaudible. When the preacher asked for a ring, Varen produced one from his pocket, plain silver, too large for Lena's finger. It slid on and immediately slipped loose. She closed her fist to keep it from falling. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said, sounding relieved that it was over. "You may, well, that is, you're married now." Varen paid him in cash. They signed the certificate. The preacher made a notation in his record book with shaking hands, and just like that, Lena Zhao became Lena Varen. They walked out into a street lit by lanterns and starlight. Somewhere in the saloon, a piano played badly. Men's voices rose and fell in arguments about cards and women and claims that would never pay out. "We should go back," Lena said. "Not yet." Varen's hand settled on her elbow, light but firm. "There's someone who needs to know what we just did." He steered her toward the largest building on the main street, a two-story structure with glass windows and a sign that read, "Taggart Mining and Operations." Light spilled from the windows. Through them, Lena could see men gathered around a table covered in maps. "What are we doing?" she asked. "Making a statement." Varen pushed open the door without knocking. The conversation inside stopped. 6 men turned to stare. 5 of them were rough types, hired muscle with guns and attitudes to match. The 6th was different, older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a suit that looked like it had been made in Denver or maybe even back east. He stood at the head of the table with the easy authority of a man who'd never been told no, Marcus Taggart. "Varen," Taggart's voice was smooth, cultured. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "Didn't ask for an invitation." Varen's hand stayed on Lena's elbow, a claim as clear as a brand. "Just wanted you to know that the Brightwater claim is no longer available for purchase." Taggart's gaze shifted to Lena. "Miss Zhao, a pleasure to see you again." He said it like they were at a society party instead of a mining office full of armed men. "I heard about Mr. Chen's unfortunate passing. Terrible business." "It was." Lena kept her voice steady. "Which is why I've taken steps to secure my interests." "By partnering with Varen," Taggart's smile was thin. "An interesting choice." "By marrying him," Lena lifted her left hand, letting the too large ring catch the light. "As of an hour ago. The Brightwater is a family claim now, fully legal, fully protected." The room went very quiet. Taggart's smile didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "I see. Well then, congratulations are in order." He moved to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. "Let's drink to the happy couple." "We're not staying." Varen's tone was flat. "Just wanted you to know where things stand." "Of course." Taggart poured 2 glasses anyway. "But surely you have time for one drink to celebrate your partnership." It was a test. Lena could feel it in the way the other men shifted, in the weight of their stares, and Taggart's too pleasant smile. "One drink," she said. Taggart handed them each a glass. The whiskey was good, better than anything Lena had tasted in Red Hollow. Expensive, a show of wealth and power. "To the Brightwater," Taggart said, raising his own glass. "May it bring you everything you hope for." They drank. The whiskey burned going down. "Now," Taggart continued, setting his glass aside, "I do hope you'll reconsider my previous offers, Mrs. Varen. The Brightwater is a challenging claim, the silver vein is unpredictable, and operating costs in this region can be prohibitive. If you ever find yourself in financial difficulty, I'd be happy to help." "We'll manage," Lena said. "I'm sure you'll try." Taggart's smile sharpened. "But the frontier is unforgiving, especially to those who aren't prepared for its hardships. Men die here. Accidents happen. Mines collapse. Equipment fails." He paused. "Marriages dissolve." Varen set his glass down with careful precision. "Are you threatening my wife, Taggart?" "Threatening? No. Simply stating facts." Taggart gestured to the maps on his table. "This is a difficult business. Only the strong survive. I would hate to see Mrs. Varen suffer because of choices made in haste." The air in the room had turned sharp, like the moment before a storm breaks. Lena stepped forward, putting herself between Varen and Taggart. Mr. Taggart, I appreciate your concern, but I didn't come to Red Hollow looking for easy. I came looking for opportunity, and I'll be damned if I let anyone, no matter how strong they think they are, take that from me. For a moment, Taggart's polished facade slipped. His eyes went hard as flint. Then the smile returned, colder than before. Of course. I admire your spirit, Mrs. Varen. He inclined his head. I wish you both the best of luck. You'll need it. They left. Outside, Lena realized her hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists and focused on breathing. That was stupid, Varen said quietly. What you did in there. What I did was show him I'm not afraid. You should be. Varen untied the horses. Men like Taggart don't respect courage. They see it as a challenge. Then let him be challenged. Lena swung into the saddle, grateful for the familiar motion. I'm tired of being afraid. Varen looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dark. Then he mounted his own horse. Let's go home. Home. The word felt strange, foreign. Lena had lived in the Brightwater house for 6 months, but it had never felt like home. Just a place to sleep between shifts in the mine. But now, riding through the dark with a husband she barely knew and enemies she was only beginning to understand, the word carried a different weight. Home meant something worth fighting for, and Lena had never backed down from a fight in her life. Quote. They reached the Brightwater close to midnight. Varen checked the perimeter while Lena lit lamps and tried not to think about the fact that she was now married to a man whose first name she'd learned less than 6 hours ago. When he came back inside, she had coffee brewing and the marriage certificate laid out on the table. Find anything? She asked. Tracks. 3 riders circling the property. Varen poured himself coffee and drank it black. They're watching us. Taggart's men? Probably. They'll report back that we're here together. By morning, the whole town will know. Lena wrapped her hands around her own cup, seeking warmth. Will they try anything tonight? No, too soon. Taggart's smart. He'll wait, see if we fall apart on our own. Varen set his cup down and met her eyes. We need ground rules. I'm listening. I take the couch, you keep the bedroom. We work the mine together, but you make the operational decisions. I handle security and anything that requires a gun. He paused. And if someone asks if this marriage is real, we say yes. No hesitation. Because the moment they think we're faking it, they'll use it against us. Lena nodded slowly. Agreed. But I have a rule too. What's that? We don't lie to each other, not about the important things. She held his gaze. If you're planning something, if you see danger coming, you tell me. I won't be kept in the dark like some fragile thing that needs protecting. Varen's mouth quirked. You don't strike me as fragile. I'm not. But you strike me as the type who'd make decisions without asking, because you think it's for the best. Lena leaned forward. That stops now. We're partners, equals, or this doesn't work. Fair enough. Varen stood and grabbed his saddlebag. I'll bring my things in. You should get some sleep. We start early tomorrow. Doing what? Teaching you to shoot. At her look of surprise, he added, if we're doing this, you need to be able to defend yourself. I can't be everywhere at once. He left before she could respond. Lena sat in the kitchen, listening to him move around outside. The coffee had gone cold. The ring on her finger slid loose again, and she twisted it back into place. She'd married a killer to save a mine. She'd defied one of the most powerful men in the territory. And tomorrow, she'd learn to shoot. Her father would have been appalled. Her mother would have wept. Her uncle had already written her off as lost. But sitting in that small house with the smell of coffee and dust, and the distant sound of her new husband settling in, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, probably foolish hope, but hope nonetheless. She finished her cold coffee, locked the doors, and went to bed in a room that felt smaller now that she knew someone else was sleeping 20 feet away. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the dark, coyotes called to each other. And in Red Hollow, men made plans that would test everything Lena had gambled on tonight. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she was Lena Varen. And for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, she wasn't alone. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that made bones ache and doubts feel heavier. Lena woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving in her kitchen. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was, forgot what she'd done. Then the ring slipped loose on her finger again, and memory crashed back. Married, to a stranger, to save a mind that might kill her anyway. She dressed quickly in work clothes, canvas trousers, a wool shirt that had belonged to her father, boots that laced to mid-calf. When she emerged from the bedroom, Varen was at the stove frying salt pork with the efficiency of a man who'd cooked for himself more times than he could count. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning." Lena poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching him. In daylight, he looked harder somehow, the scar on his face more pronounced. He moved like someone who'd learned to be aware of everything, the door, the windows, where his gun was. "You didn't have to make breakfast." "Needed to eat anyway." He slid the pork onto 2 tin plates, added beans from a pot she hadn't noticed. "Figured you would too." They ate standing up, the silence between them not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Lena tried to think of something to say, some way to bridge the strangeness of sharing a meal with a man who was legally her husband but remained entirely unknown to her. Varen saved her the trouble. "You ever fire a gun?" "Once. My father taught me to shoot his pistol when I was 12. She set her empty plate in the basin. "I hit the fence post instead of the target." "Close enough. At least you know which end the bullet comes out of." He dried his hands on a rag. "Get your coat. We'll start with rifles." The morning air bit at exposed skin as they walked to a flat stretch of ground behind the barn. Varen had already set up targets, old bottles lined on a fallen log, maybe 30 yards away. He carried 2 rifles, both well-maintained despite their age. "This is a Winchester," he said, handing her the lighter of the 2. 15 rounds. "You need to understand this gun like you understand breathing. When Taggart's men come, and they will come, you won't have time to think." Lena took the rifle, surprised by its weight. "You're certain they'll come?" "Men like Taggart don't accept defeat. We embarrassed him last night, made him look weak in front of his people." Varen positioned himself beside her, adjusting her grip on the rifle. His hands were calloused, impersonal. "He'll wait until he thinks we're comfortable. Then he'll test us." "How do you know?" "Because it's what I do." The admission hung between them. Lena glanced at him, trying to reconcile the man making breakfast an hour ago with whatever he'd been before arriving in Red Hollow. "What were you, before this?" Varen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat, stripped of emotion. "A lot of things. None of them good." He stepped back. "Shoulder the rifle. Line up your sight with the target. Breathe out when you pull the trigger." The first shot went wide, kicking the rifle into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. The second shattered a bottle. The third and fourth missed entirely. By the 10th shot, her shoulder ached and frustration made her hands clumsy. "Stop!" Varen took the rifle from her. "You're tensing up, anticipating the recoil." "Because it hurts. It's supposed to hurt. That's how you remember to respect it." He reloaded and demonstrated, his movements smooth and practiced. 3 shots, 3 bottles exploding into fragments. "You don't fight the gun. You work with it." They spent 2 hours on the shooting. By the end, Lena could hit the targets more often than not, and her shoulder felt like one solid bruise. Varen showed no signs of impatience, correcting her stance and grip with the same detached efficiency he brought to everything else. "Good enough for now," he finally said. "Tomorrow we work on pistols." "Tomorrow?" Lena flexed her aching fingers. "I have a mine to run. And you'll run it, but you'll also learn to defend it." Varen started gathering the spent casings. "This isn't negotiable." Anger flared, quick and hot. "You don't get to make those decisions. We agreed I handle security. This is security." He met her eyes, and there was something almost gentle in his expression. Almost. "You're tough, Lena. I saw that last night. But tough doesn't stop a bullet. Skill does. So you'll learn." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she'd survived 6 months in Red Hollow without his help, managed a mine with workers who resented taking orders from a woman, navigated a town that saw her as an outsider twice over. But standing there with her shoulder throbbing and the memory of bottles exploding under her aim, she understood what he wasn't saying. Being tough only mattered if you lived long enough to use it. "Fine," she said. But we do it early, before the work crew arrives. Deal. They walked back to the house in silence. The sun had burned off the morning gray, and in better light the Brightwater almost looked hopeful. Almost. Lena saw it too clearly. The equipment that needed replacing, the timber supports in the mine that worried her every time she went underground, the ore cart with the broken axle she couldn't afford to fix. "How much money do we have?" Varen asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Enough for another month. Maybe 6 weeks if I cut the crew's wages." She hated saying it out loud. "The silver's there. I know it is. But we're not pulling it out fast enough, and the equipment keeps failing." "What about Chen's half of the operating capital?" Lena laughed, bitter. "There was no capital. He promised funding, but it never materialized. I've been running this on savings and hope." Varen stopped walking. "He lied to you." "Apparently." She kept moving, not wanting to see whatever judgment might be in his face. "I was desperate. He knew it. I needed a partner to satisfy the territorial laws, and he needed, I don't know what he needed. Money, I guess. He thought the mine would pay out quick, and when it didn't, he borrowed from me to cover his gambling debts." Varen caught up to her. $8,000 over 3 months. When I came to collect, he offered me the partnership instead. "Why did you take it?" "Because I checked the geological surveys. The silver's here. You were right about that." He paused. "And because Chen mentioned you, said you were smart but stubborn, that you'd work yourself to death before you'd admit defeat." "He wasn't wrong." "No, he wasn't." They reached the house as the work crew arrived, 4 men who'd been with the Brightwater since before Lena bought it. They were rough, taciturn, and deeply skeptical of working for a woman. The fact that she could calculate yield rates and identify ore quality better than any of them didn't matter nearly as much as it should have. The foreman was a man named Garrett, 40-something with a face like weathered leather and a voice roughened by years of breathing rock dust. He took one look at Varen, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Ma'am," he said to Lena, touching his hat brim. Then to Varen, "Heard you two got married." "News travels," Varen said. "Always does." Garrett's gaze flicked between them, assessing. "This going to change how things run?" "No," Lena said firmly. "I'm still managing operations. Varen handles security." "Security?" Garrett spat into the dirt. "We had trouble?" "Not yet, but we will." Varen's tone invited no argument. "Anyone comes onto this property who isn't crew, you let me know. Immediately." Garrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." He turned to Lena. "We pulling from the east shaft today?" "West." The east vein played out. She grabbed her own work coat. "I'll be down in 20 minutes." The crew dispersed toward the mine entrance, their voices carrying in the still morning air. Lena started to follow, but Varen caught her arm. "You're going down there?" he asked. "It's my mine. I go down every day." "Not anymore." At her sharp look, he continued, "I'm not telling you not to work. I'm telling you not to go down alone. Too easy for an accident that isn't an accident. The crew wouldn't... I'm not worried about your crew. I'm worried about who might have gotten to them." Varen released her arm. "Taggart has money. Money buys loyalty. Or at least it buys silence." The thought made her stomach clench. She'd trusted these men, relied on them. "You think one of them works for Taggart?" "I think it's possible. And until we know for certain, you don't put yourself in a position where a tunnel collapse could look accidental." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was being paranoid, but the memory of Taggart's cold eyes and colder smile stopped her. "Fine. You come with me." "Can't. I need to ride the perimeter, check for more tracks." He jerked his chin toward the youngest of the crew, a kid named Thomas, who couldn't be more than 19. "Take him. He's green enough that Taggart wouldn't bother buying him." It was practical. Cold maybe, but practical. Lena nodded and went to tell Thomas he'd be working directly with her today. The kid looked thrilled and terrified in equal measure. The mine swallowed them into familiar darkness lit by lanterns that never seemed quite bright enough. The air tasted of rock and damp and the metallic tang of ore. Lena had learned to love this darkness, the way it simplified everything to the work at hand. No distractions, no judgments, just rock and determination. Thomas talked as they worked, a steady stream of nervous chatter that Lena only half listened to. He mentioned his mother in Missouri, a girl he was sweet on back in Red Hollow, plans to save enough money to buy his own claim someday. Young dreams, fragile ones. Mrs. Varon? Thomas's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Is it true what they're saying about you and Cade? Lena looked up from the ore sample she was examining. What are they saying? That you married him to keep Taggart from taking the mine. That it's just, business. She could lie, should probably lie, but something about the kid's earnest face made her choose honesty instead. It's complicated. But yes, it's partly business. Only partly? I don't know yet. The admission surprised her. Ask me in a month. Thomas grinned. Folks in town are taking bets on how long you two last. Most say a week. Then most folks are going to lose money. Lena handed him the ore sample. Take this to the surface. I want to test the silver content. She worked alone for perhaps 10 minutes before she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a scraping, like metal on stone, coming from deeper in the tunnel. Lena grabbed her lantern and moved toward it, every instinct screaming caution. The sound came again, closer. Who's there? She called. No answer. Just the scraping, and now something else. A smell. Acrid. Chemical. Lena's mind supplied the answer a half second before her eyes confirmed it. Blasting powder. Someone had set charges in the tunnel. She ran. The explosion caught her halfway to the entrance, a wall of sound and force that knocked her forward. The lantern flew from her hand, smashing against rock. Darkness swallowed everything, then dust, choking and thick, filled her lungs. Lena crawled forward on instinct, one hand on the tunnel wall, the other searching blindly ahead. Her ears rang, her chest burned. Somewhere behind her, timber groaned and stone shifted with sounds that promised collapse. Light appeared ahead. Not much, but enough. She pushed toward it, coughing dust and blood, until hands grabbed her arms and hauled her into daylight. Garrett's face swam into focus above her. Easy. Don't move. Charges, Lena gasped. Someone set charges. We know. Whole tunnel's compromised. He helped her sit up. Thomas went for Varon. The world tilted sideways. Lena focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on processing what had just happened. Someone had tried to kill her, or at least tried to destroy the mine. Either way, the message was clear. Varon arrived at a gallop, dismounting before his horse fully stopped. His eyes swept over her, cataloging injuries with clinical precision. Where's the damage? West shaft. It'll take weeks to clear. Garrett's voice was grim. If we can clear it at all. Anyone else hurt? Just Mrs. Varon. Varon crouched in front of Lena. His hands were steady as he checked her pupils, the side of her head where she'd hit rock. Can you stand? Yes. She proved it by getting to her feet, ignoring the way the world swayed. It was deliberate. The charges were placed too precisely to be anything else. I know. Varon's jaw tightened. Garrett, gather the crew. I want to know who was supposed to be working that shaft today, who had access, and who wasn't where they should have been. Garrett hesitated. You think it was one of us? I think someone knew exactly where to place those charges to cause maximum damage without killing anyone. That takes inside knowledge. Varon's gaze swept the assembled men. So either one of you is working for Taggart, or someone got to your equipment. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Thomas looked ready to be sick. Lena found her voice, rough from dust but steady. Search their things, the bunkhouse, their saddlebags. If someone's being paid to sabotage us, there'll be evidence. Ma'am, that's... One of the older miners started. Non-negotiable, Lena cut him off. You work for me. You submit to search, or you collect your pay and leave. Your choice. Silence. Then slowly the men nodded. Varon took Lena's arm. Inside. Now. She let him guide her to the house, too tired to argue. Once inside, he sat her at the kitchen table and brought water, a clean cloth, the bottle of whiskey from the cabinet. Drink, he said, pouring 2 fingers into a glass. I don't drink. The whiskey burned worse than the dust had. Lena coughed, eyes watering, but the fog in her head cleared slightly. Varen wetted the cloth and began cleaning the blood from her temple with surprising gentleness. You were lucky. A few more seconds and that tunnel would have come down on your head. It wasn't luck. Thomas sent me to the surface right before... She stopped. He sent me to the surface. I noticed. Varen's hands paused. Either he saved you or he's a damn good actor. He's 19 and terrified of everything. I don't think he has the nerve to be a saboteur. We'll see. Varen finished cleaning her wounds and stepped back. You're going to have a hell of a headache, probably some bruised ribs, but you'll live. What about the mine? His expression told her everything she needed to know. The west shaft is gone. Even if we clear the debris, the support structure's compromised. We'd be rebuilding from scratch. Lena closed her eyes. The west shaft had been their most productive vein. Without it, they had maybe 2 weeks of viable ore left. Not enough to meet their debts, not enough to survive. Taggart wins, she said quietly. Not yet, he doesn't. Varen sat across from her. We still have options. What options? We're broke, one of my crew might be a saboteur, and half my mine just collapsed. We have the east shaft. You said it played out, but did you do a full geological survey? Or did you just follow the obvious vein? Lena opened her eyes. I followed the vein. I don't have money for a full survey. What if I told you I think there's a deeper vein, one that connects to Taggart's mine? I'd ask how you know that. Varen pulled a folded paper from his pocket and spread it on the table. It was a map, hand-drawn but detailed, showing the Brightwater claim and the surrounding properties. Someone had marked veins in red ink, tracing them through the rock. Chen made this, Varen said, before he died. He was drunk, talking about how Taggart was trying to buy him out. Said there was silver under the Brightwater that would make them all rich, if only they could access it. He tapped a spot on the map. This is where I think the main vein runs, under your land, through Taggart's, and out toward the river valley. Lena studied the map, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten. If this is accurate, then Taggart knows you're sitting on a fortune. That's why he wants you gone. Varen refolded the map. But accessing that vein means going deeper, more labor, more equipment, more time, all of which require money we don't have. So we get creative. Varen stood and moved to the window, watching the yard where the crew was being searched. I have some cash left from what Chen owed me. Enough to buy equipment if we're smart about it. You'd invest in a failing mine? I'd invest in a mine that has potential, and a partner who's too stubborn to quit. He glanced back at her. But we do this my way. No more working alone. No more assuming people are trustworthy until they prove otherwise. We lock this place down tight, and we watch everyone. Lena wanted to argue that he was being paranoid, but her head throbbed where she'd hit rock and dust still coated her lungs. Someone had tried to destroy her mind today. Maybe tried to kill her. Paranoia seemed reasonable. All right, she said, your way. But I want that deep vein surveyed properly. If we're going to risk everything on Chen's drunk cartography, I need to know it's real. Fair enough, Varen turned back to the window. Garrett's coming. Looks like they found something. Lena joined him at the window. Sure enough, Garrett was crossing the yard with something in his hand. They met him at the door. Found this in Bennett's saddlebag, Garrett said, holding up a leather pouch. $50 in silver coins, fresh from the mint. Bennett was the oldest of the crew, a man who'd worked these mountains for 20 years and complained about everything from the weather to the quality of salt pork. Lena had trusted him. Where is he? Varen asked. Ran when he saw us searching, took off on foot toward town. Garrett's expression was disgusted. Sorry, ma'am. Should have seen it coming. None of us did. Lena took the pouch, felt the weight of betrayal in those silver coins. Did he say anything? Before he ran? Just that he had debts, that we wouldn't understand. Varen's hand settled on his gun. I'm going after him. No. Lena surprised herself with the firmness of it. Let him go. We know who paid him now. That's enough. He tried to kill you. He tried to destroy the mine. If he'd wanted me dead, he would have set the charges differently. She met Varen's eyes. Let him go. For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded, slowly. All right, but he doesn't work in this territory again. I'll make sure of it. Garrett cleared his throat. What about the rest of us, ma'am? You want us to stay? Lena looked at the remaining crew members gathered in the yard. Young Thomas, loyal despite his nervousness. The two middle-aged miners who'd never given her trouble. They were watching her, waiting to see if she'd break. "Back to work," she said. "We've got a mine to save." The afternoon passed in hard labor and harder decisions. They couldn't access the west shaft, so Lena redirected everyone to the east tunnel. Varen worked alongside them, his presence a silent deterrent to any further sabotage. He didn't speak much, but when he did, the crew listened. By sunset, they'd pulled enough ore to fill 3 carts. Not great, but not nothing either. Lena stood outside the mine entrance, watching the crew head home, and tried to calculate how many days like this they'd need to survive. The numbers didn't work. They never worked. "Stop thinking so loud," Varen said from behind her. "I can hear your brain grinding from here. We're not going to make it. Even with the crew working double shifts, we can't pull enough ore to cover our costs. Not with conventional methods, no." He handed her a cup of coffee. When had he made coffee? And leaned against the timber support. "But what if we're not conventional?" Meaning Taggart expects us to struggle, maybe sell out of desperation. What if we do the opposite? What if we expand? Lena stared at him. "With what money?" "With the money we're about to borrow." Varen pulled out a second folded paper. "There's a banker in Sacramento, owes me a favor, a big one. I think I can get us a loan." "Based on what collateral? A map drawn by a drunk dead man?" "Based on mineral rights to a claim that sits on top of what could be the richest silver vein in the territory." Varen's expression was serious. "It's a gamble. But everything about this place is a gamble." He wasn't wrong. Lena sipped her coffee and watched the sun paint the mountains in shades of amber and rust. She'd gambled everything to come here. Gambled again when she'd married a stranger. One more bet hardly seemed reckless at this point. "How big a loan?" she asked. "Big enough to buy proper equipment, hire experienced miners, and pay for a real geological survey." He paused. "Big enough to scare Taggart, or big enough to bury us if we're wrong." "Yeah, that too." Lena finished her coffee and handed him the cup. "Do it. Contact your banker. But I'm coming with you. If we're betting the farm, I want to look the man in the eye who's lending us the money." Varen's mouth quirked into something almost like a smile. "Wouldn't expect anything less." They walked back to the house as twilight deepened into true dark. Inside, Varen made dinner, more salt pork, beans, biscuits that were only slightly burned. They ate in companionable silence, the events of the day settling between them like sediment after a storm. "You handled yourself well today," Varen said eventually. "After the explosion, some people would have fallen apart." Falling apart seemed impractical. Lena pushed her empty plate away. "My father used to say that panic is a luxury. You have to earn the right to it by surviving first." Smart man. He was. Until tuberculosis killed him when I was 16. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't talked about her father in years, but exhaustion made secrets harder to keep. "My mother died 2 years later. Broken heart," the doctor said. "I think she just gave up." Varen nodded slowly. "My parents died when I was 12. Fever took my mother. My father drank himself to death 6 months later." He stood and began clearing the table. "I enlisted as soon as I was old enough to lie about my age. Figured the army was better than starving." "Was it?" "Some days." He didn't elaborate, and Lena didn't push. They washed dishes side by side, the simple domesticity of it strange after everything else. When they finished, Varen checked the doors and windows like he had the night before. Lena watched him move through the house, methodical and thorough, and wondered what he saw that she didn't. What threats lived in his head that made him so careful? "Get some sleep," he said, catching her watching. "We leave for Sacramento in 2 days. You'll need your strength." "What about you?" "I'll sleep when I'm sure we're secure." Lena wanted to tell him he was being excessive, that they were safe enough. But the memory of the explosion, the dust choking her lungs, the sound of timber groaning, those things made safety feel like a lie they were all pretending to believe. "Thank you," she said instead. "For today, for everything." Varen looked at her for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable in the lamplight. "We're partners. You'd do the same for me." Would she? Lena wasn't sure. She'd never had to protect anyone but herself before. The thought of standing between Varen and danger seemed absurd. He was the one with the gun, the skills, the hard-won experience. But watching him check the window latches one more time, she understood what he wasn't saying. Partnership meant showing up, meant standing your ground even when running made more sense. She'd done that today. Stayed in the mine instead of fleeing to Sacramento on the first stage. Stood in front of her crew and made decisions when everything was falling apart. Maybe that was enough. "Good night, Cade," she said, using his given name for the first time. Something shifted in his expression. "Good night, Lena." She went to bed and lay in the dark, listening to him move around the house. Eventually the sound stopped. She pictured him on the couch, boots still on, gun within reach, eyes probably open despite what he'd said about sleep. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere an owl called. And in Red Hollow, Taggart would be hearing about the explosion by now. Hearing about Bennett running. Realizing his first move had failed. Lena closed her eyes and tried not to think about what his second move might be. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of collapsing tunnels and cold gray eyes. When she finally sank into deeper rest, her hand clutched the too large ring on her finger like a talisman against all the things that wanted to destroy what she'd built. In the morning, they'd start planning for Sacramento. But tonight, in the fragile quiet of the Brightwater, Lena Varen allowed herself to believe they might actually survive this. They never made it to Sacramento. The attack came on the second night, 3 hours past midnight, when exhaustion had finally pulled Lena under. She woke to the smell of smoke and Varen's hand clamped over her mouth. "Don't scream," he whispered against her ear. "Get dressed. Boots. Now." He was gone before she could respond, moving toward the window with his rifle already in hand. Lena's fingers fumbled with buttons and laces, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Through the bedroom window, she could see orange light flickering. Wrong, wrong, the barn was burning. She emerged from the bedroom to find Varen crouched by the front window, his face carved from shadow and firelight. "How many?" she asked. "At least 6. Maybe more." His voice was utterly calm, like he was discussing the weather. "They torched the barn first, probably hoping we'd run out to save it. The horses? Already gone. I turned them loose when I heard riders coming." He glanced back at her. "Can you shoot?" "You know I can." "I mean, can you shoot at a man who's trying to kill you? Different thing entirely." Lena's mouth went dry, but she nodded. Varen handed her a pistol and a box of ammunition. The gun was heavier than the rifles they'd practiced with, the metal cold against her palm. "They'll try to flush us out with fire," Varen said. "When that doesn't work, they'll come in shooting. We have maybe 10 minutes before this house turns into a coffin." He met her eyes. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. Because we're about to do something stupid." Glass shattered in the kitchen. A bottle flew through the window, flames erupting as it hit the floor. Lena watched fire spread across the boards with terrifying speed, eating toward the walls, the furniture, everything. "Back door," Varen said. 3, 2, 1. They burst out together into chaos. Men on horseback circled the property, their faces masked with bandanas, rifles raised. Varen fired before Lena fully processed what she was seeing. One shot, clean through a rider's shoulder, the man toppling from his saddle with a scream. "Run!" Varen shoved her toward the mine entrance. "Get underground and don't come out until I get you." "I'm not leaving you." "You're not dying because you're stubborn." Another shot, another man down. "Move!" Lena ran. Bullets kicked up dirt at her heels, one passing close enough that she felt the air displace. The mine entrance loomed ahead, dark and familiar, and she dove into it like a swimmer into deep water. Behind her, gunfire cracked like thunder. She pressed herself against the tunnel wall, breathing hard, the pistol clutched in both hands. Footsteps pounded outside. Heavy boots, more than one person. Coming closer. A man appeared at the entrance, silhouetted against the burning barn. He saw her and raised his rifle. Lena fired without thinking, the pistol's recoil jarring her arms. The bullet went wide, but close enough that the man stumbled back, cursing. "She's in the mine!" he shouted. "Someone get—" Varen materialized behind him like something conjured from nightmare. One hand locked around the man's throat, the other drove a knife between his ribs with brutal efficiency. The man made a wet, choking sound and went limp. Varen let him drop and stepped into the mine entrance. "You hit?" he asked. "No." Lena's voice shook despite her best efforts. "You?" "Not yet." He reloaded his rifle with movements so practiced they looked like muscle memory. Blood stained his shirt. Not his, she realized. Someone else's. They're regrouping. 5 left, maybe 6. They didn't expect resistance. "What do we do?" Varen looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were hard as iron. "We make them regret coming here." What followed was the longest hour of Lena's life. They moved through the mine tunnels like ghosts, using the darkness and their knowledge of the layout against men who had numbers but not skill. Varen taught her with actions instead of words, where to position herself for clean shots, how to move silently on loose rock, when to fire and when to wait. She killed her first man in the east shaft. He'd been searching blindly with a lantern, calling for his companions, and she'd stepped out behind him and pulled the trigger. The shot took him in the back and he fell forward without a sound. Lena stood there, gun still raised, waiting to feel something: horror, guilt, revulsion. Instead, she felt nothing, just a strange, cold clarity. Varen found her standing over the body. He didn't ask if she was all right, just reloaded her pistol and handed it back. "2 more in the main tunnel. Think you can draw them out?" "How?" "Make noise. They'll come running." He positioned himself in the shadows. "When they do, drop and cover your head." Lena walked into the main tunnel and fired twice into the ceiling. Rocks fell, dust billowed, and she heard shouting as men rushed toward the sound. She dropped to the ground, arms over her head, and Varen's rifle spoke twice. The shouting stopped. They climbed back to the surface to find the house fully engulfed, flames reaching toward a sky just starting to lighten with false dawn. Bodies lay scattered in the yard, 5 in total, though Lena had lost count during the fighting. One man was still alive, pinned under his dead horse, groaning. Varen approached him with the same cold efficiency he'd shown all night. He crouched down and ripped the bandana from the man's face. The face beneath was young, maybe 25, twisted with pain and fear. "Who sent you?" Varen asked. "Go to hell." Varen pressed his rifle barrel against the man's leg, just above where the horse had crushed it. The man screamed. "Who sent you?" "Taggart. It was Taggart. He paid us 500 each to burn you out." The words tumbled over themselves. "Please, I need a doctor." "You need to deliver a message." Varen stood. "You tell Taggart that if he wants this land, he'll have to take it from our corpses. And he'd better bring more men than this." He walked away, leaving the man crying in the dirt. Lena stared at the burning house, at the bodies, at the blood staining the ground that had been just earth yesterday. Everything they'd built, everything they owned, gone in smoke and violence. "What now?" she asked. Varen was already moving toward the mine. "Now we go underground. They'll be back with reinforcements once that one tells Taggart what happened. We need to be ready." The remaining crew arrived at sunrise to find devastation. Garrett took one look at the scene and his face went gray. "Sweet merciful. What happened?" "Taggart happened." Lena was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "He sent men to kill us and burn the claim. He failed." Thomas stared at the bodies. "Mrs. Varen, we should get the sheriff." "The sheriff works for Taggart." Varen hauled equipment from the intact tool shed. Going to him would just tell Taggart we survived. Let him wonder. "We can't just leave." Thomas gestured helplessly at the carnage. "We can, and we will." Lena picked up a shovel. "Right now we have work to do. Garrett, take the crew into the east tunnel. Pull every ounce of ore you can. Thomas, you're with me. We're surveying the deep vein." "Ma'am, with respect, shouldn't we..." "Shouldn't we what? Run? Hide?" Lena's exhaustion was turning into something sharper, harder. "They burned my house, killed my livestock, tried to murder me in my sleep. And you think I'm going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me quit?" She hefted the shovel. "Get to work, all of you." The crew exchanged glances but moved. They'd seen her survive an explosion and a gunfight in the same week. Whatever doubt they'd harbored about her resolve was gone. Lena and Thomas descended into the east shaft with surveying equipment and Chen's dubious map. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became, until Lena could see her breath in the lantern light. They reached the end of the existing tunnel, and Lena began taking measurements, marking the rock face, calculating angles and depths. "There," she said finally, pointing to a spot on the wall. "If Chen's map is right, the main vein runs about 15 feet beyond this point, sloping down and west." Thomas tapped the rock face with his pick. The sound was different here, more hollow. "You want me to break through?" "No, I want to blast through." Lena studied the wall, her mind already calculating powder loads and fuse lengths. "We'll need supports first. I'm not risking another collapse." They worked through the morning and into afternoon, shoring up the tunnel with fresh timber, hauling equipment from the surface. Varen appeared periodically, always armed, always watchful. He'd drag bodies away during one trip, coming back with blood on his hands that he'd wash in the creek without comment. By evening, they had the charges set. Lena cleared everyone from the tunnel and lit the fuse herself, counting seconds as she ran for the entrance. The explosion was muffled by earth and rock, more a deep thump than a crack. Dust billowed out of the shaft. They waited 20 minutes for the air to clear, then descended with lanterns and hope that felt increasingly desperate. The blast had opened a hole in the wall, ragged but passable. Beyond it, the lantern light caught on something that made Lena's breath stop. Silver. Not traces or veins or promises. Solid silver running through the rock like frozen lightning, more than she'd seen in 6 months of digging combined. "Holy hell," Thomas whispered. Lena touched the exposed vein with trembling fingers. Chen's map had been right. The deep vein was real, and it was worth a fortune. "Get Garrett," she said quietly. "We're going to need everyone." Thomas scrambled up the tunnel, his excited shouts echoing. Lena stood alone in the new chamber, surrounded by silver and possibility, and let herself feel something close to hope. Varen found her there an hour later, still staring at the vein like it might disappear if she looked away. "The crew's celebrating," he said. Garrett broke out whiskey from somewhere. "We found it. It's real." "I can see that." He stepped closer, examining the vein with a critical eye. "This changes things." "It changes everything. We can pay our debts, buy new equipment, rebuild." Lena stopped, reality crashing back. "Assuming Taggart lets us live long enough." "He won't stop now. Not when he knows what we're sitting on." Varen's hand rested on his gun. "That man I let live will tell him about the silver. By tomorrow, Taggart will know he can't wait us out or scare us off. He'll come with everything he has." "How many men does he have?" "Enough." Varen was quiet for a moment. "We can't win a straight fight, Lena. If he brings 20 men, 30 will be slaughtered." "Then what do we do?" "We make it so expensive that winning costs him more than the mine's worth." Varen turned to look at her. "But that means burning bridges, making enemies. Maybe dying anyway." Lena thought about the house she'd lost, the mare that had carried her from Red Hollow, the quiet life she'd imagined building here, all of it gone already. What was left to lose? "Then we burn bridges," she said. "Tell me what you need." What Varen needed, it turned out, was darkness and distance and a cold willingness to do terrible things. They spent the night preparing, not in the mine, but in the ruins of the barn, gathering every weapon they had, every bullet, every tool that could be turned into a trap. "Taggart will come from the road," Varen said, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "He'll want to make a show of it, ride in with his men, announce his intention to take the claim, give us a chance to surrender. We won't. No, we won't. Which means he'll order his men to fire." Varen marked positions in the dirt. "We set up here, here, and here, crossfire. We let them get close enough to feel confident, then we cut them down." "That's murder." Lena said it without judgment, just stating fact. "That's survival." Varen looked up at her. "You having second thoughts?" "No, just making sure we both understand what this is." They worked until dawn, setting traps and preparing positions, turning the Brightwater claim into a killing ground. The crew helped without asking questions, though Lena saw the fear in their faces. They knew what was coming. Everyone did. Garrett pulled Lena aside as the sun rose. "Ma'am, I got a wife, kids in Missouri. If this goes bad..." "It won't," Lena lied. But if it does, take your pay from the strongbox in the mine office. Get out while you can. That's not what I was going to say. Garrett's weathered face was serious. I was going to say I'm staying, whatever comes. You gave us work when no one else would, treated us fair. That means something. Lena didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. The crew took positions as midday sun climbed toward its peak, Thomas with a rifle on the ridge, Garrett and the other two miners scattered around the property, Varen in the tool shed with a clear line of sight to the road, and Lena herself in the mine entrance, pistol loaded, watching the dust rise in the distance. They came at noon exactly, like an appointment with death, 20 men on horseback, riding in formation with Taggart at the center. He wore a suit despite the dust and heat, looking more like a businessman than a murderer, which, Lena supposed, was exactly what he was. The riders stopped 50 yards from where the house had stood. Taggart dismounted with the casual confidence of a man who'd never lost anything in his life. "Mrs. Varen," he called, "I believe we have business to discuss." Lena stepped out of the mine entrance, aware of every gun pointed in her direction. "We have nothing to discuss." "I think we do." Taggart gestured at the burned ruins. "Terrible thing, what happened here. I heard about the fire. Such a tragedy." "You sent men to burn us out. They're dead now." "I sent no one. If someone attacked you, well..." Taggart spread his hands. "The frontier's dangerous. Lawless men do lawless things. Funny how those lawless men just happened to attack on the same day we found the deep vein." Taggart's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I don't know what you mean." "The silver vein that runs under my land and through yours. The one you've been trying to steal for months." Lena took a step forward. "Did you think I wouldn't figure it out?" "Careful, Mrs. Varen. Accusations without proof are dangerous." "So is trespassing on my claim with 20 armed men." Taggart smiled. "I'm here to make you an offer. One final chance to sell. $50,000. More than fair for a burned-out claim and a depleted mine." "The mine's not depleted, and the claim's not for sale." "Then I'm afraid we have a problem." Taggart's voice hardened. "You see, I've filed papers with the territorial government claiming fraud in your original purchase. By this time next week, a judge will rule that your deed is invalid. The Brightwater will be seized and auctioned, and I'll buy it for a fraction of what I'm offering now." "You can't do that." "I can. I have witnesses who will swear the previous owner was coerced, documents that show irregularities, and judges who owe me favors." Taggart straightened his cuffs. "So you can take my money and leave with something, or you can fight, lose, and leave with nothing." Lena felt Varen shift in the shed, heard the metallic click of a rifle being readied. 20 seconds. That's all it would take to start a war that would end with most of them dead. "There's a third option," she said. "Which is?" "I kill you, right here, right now." Lena drew her pistol with a speed that surprised even her. "Your men scatter. I tell the real authorities what you've done, and I keep my mine." 20 rifles swung toward her instantly. Lena kept her pistol trained on Taggart's chest, her hand steady despite the hammering of her heart. Taggart laughed. Actually laughed. "You're bluffing. You won't shoot me." "Try me." For 5 long seconds, nobody moved. The world contracted to the space between Lena's finger and the trigger, between Taggart's smile and the bullet that would erase it. Then Varen stepped out of the shed, rifle leveled. "She won't shoot you, but I will." The crew emerged from their positions, weapons raised. 5 against 20. Suicide by any reasonable measure. Taggart's smile faded. "This is foolish. You're outnumbered." "Outnumbered isn't the same as outmatched." Varen's voice was cold as winter stone. "I've killed more men than you have standing here, and I'll kill every last one of them before I let you take this land. Then you'll die trying. Maybe, but you'll be dead before I fall." Varen took a step forward. "So, here's how this works. You ride away, now. Take your men, your fake documents, your bought judges, and you leave us alone. Or we find out how many of your men are willing to die for their pay." Varen's rifle didn't waver. "My guess? Not many." Taggart looked at his men. Lena saw calculation in his face, weighing profit against risk. She could see him doing the math. How many losses would it take to secure the claim, whether the silver was worth the blood? Finally, he smiled.
You win this round, Mr. Varen, but understand, this isn't over. I'll be back. With more men, more lawyers, more everything. And next time, you won't be ready.
We'll see. Taggart mounted his horse with unhurried grace. Enjoy your silver while you can, because it won't be yours for long. He turned his horse toward the road. Let's go. The riders followed, leaving nothing but dust and the memory of how close they'd come to massacre. Lena's legs went weak as the last rider disappeared. She lowered her pistol with hands that shook despite her best efforts. We did it. No. Varen was already scanning the horizon. We delayed him, that's all. He's going to come back, with everything he has, and next time he won't talk first. Varen turned to her and his expression was grave. We have maybe a week, 2 if we're lucky, then this gets decided for good. Garrett approached, still gripping his rifle. What do we do? We work, Lena said. Pull every ounce of silver from that mine. Hire more men if we can. Buy weapons. Build defenses. She looked at the burned remains of her house. And we prepare for war. The week that followed was a blur of exhaustion and preparation. They pulled silver from the deep vein in quantities that would have seemed impossible a month ago. Lena hired new crew members, hard men, some with backgrounds almost as violent as Varen's. She bought rifles and ammunition from a dealer in Sacramento who didn't ask questions. She turned the Brightwater into a fortress. Varen taught her to shoot better, to fight hand-to-hand, to think like someone who wanted to survive rather than someone who hoped to avoid conflict. The lessons were brutal, practical, stripped of anything resembling comfort. You hesitate, you die, he said one evening after knocking her flat for the 3rd time. Stop thinking, just react. Easy for you to say. Lena tasted blood from a split lip. You've been doing this your whole life. And you've been surviving in a world that didn't want you your whole life. This isn't different. He offered her a hand up. You just have to want to live more than they want you dead. That night, sleeping in a tent pitched near the mine entrance, Lena felt Varen settle nearby with his usual vigilance. She'd grown used to his presence, the way he moved, the silences he kept, the violence he carried like other men carried pocket watches. Cade, she said into the darkness. Yeah? If we don't make it through this, we will. But if we don't, Lena struggled for words. I want you to know it was worth it. All of it. Even this. Silence. Then quietly, yeah, it was. The attack came 8 days later, just before dawn. Not 20 men this time, 40, maybe 50, converging from multiple directions with the precision of a military operation. They'd learned from their first failure, but so had Lena and Varen. The fight that followed would be talked about in Red Hollow for years. How a Chinese woman and a scarred gunslinger held off an army. How they turned mines into mazes and desperation into strategy. How they fought like they had nothing to lose because they truly didn't. The battle raged for 3 hours. Fire and gun smoke turned day into night. Men fell on both sides. Thomas died defending the ridge, a bullet through his heart. One of the new crew took a shotgun blast and bled out in minutes. But Taggart's men died too, cut down by crossfire and traps, and the sheer refusal of their targets to surrender. Somewhere in the chaos, Lena found herself back-to-back with Varen in the mouth of the mine, both of them firing until their weapons ran dry. Men rushed them and fell. Smoke stung her eyes. Her ears rang from gunfire. Blood, hers and others, slicked her hands. And through it all, she felt strangely alive. Terrified, but alive. The tide turned when Garrett brought down the supply shed on 6 of Taggart's men, burying them in timber and tools. When 3 more died in a tunnel that Varen had rigged to collapse. When enough death had been dealt that the living started questioning whether any amount of silver was worth this. The retreat began slowly, then accelerated. Men mounted horses and fled. Others ran on foot. Within 20 minutes, the Brightwater was silent except for the moaning of the wounded and the crackle of small fires burning themselves out. Lena leaned against the tunnel wall, chest heaving, and counted survivors. Garrett, 2 of the original crew, 4 of the new hires, and Varen, bleeding from a gash across his ribs but standing. Is it over? She asked. Varen scanned the property, his rifle still ready. For now. They found Taggart's body among the dead, shot through the throat, probably by one of his own men in the confusion. His fine suit was ruined with blood and dirt. The man who'd tried to take everything from them looked small in death. What now? Garrett asked, surveying the damage. Lena looked at her mine, her claim, the ground soaked with blood that would never wash clean. She thought about Sacramento, about running, about all the ways this could still destroy them. Then she thought about the silver waiting underground, about the life she'd carved from hostile rock and hostiler men, about the fact that she was still standing when everyone had bet against her. Now we rebuild, she said, again. And in the ruins of the Brightwater, surrounded by the evidence of just how far she'd come and how much it had cost, Lena Varen began to believe they actually might. The bodies took 2 days to bury. Lena insisted on graves for everyone, Taggart's men included, because leaving corpses to rot felt like inviting something worse than ghosts. They dug in shifts, the surviving crew members working alongside her and Varen in grim silence. Thomas got a marker with his name carved deep. The others got mounds of rock to keep animals from the graves. On the third morning, Lena woke in the tent that had become their temporary shelter and found Varen already gone. She dressed in clothes stiff with dried blood, hers or someone else's, she'd stopped trying to tell the difference, and walked through what remained of the Brightwater claim. The barn was ash. The house was ash. The tool shed had collapsed during the fight, taking most of their equipment with it. But the mine entrance stood intact, and when Lena descended into the tunnels, she found the deep vein still gleaming in lamplight, indifferent to the violence that had raged above it. Garrett met her at the new chamber, his face haggard but determined. Crew's asking what comes next, ma'am. Some want to leave. Can't say I blame them. Pay them out. Full wages plus a bonus. Lena ran her hand along the silver vein. Anyone who stays gets a share of the profits. Equal split among all workers. Garrett's eyebrows rose. That's more than fair, ma'am. More than most would offer. Most didn't ask them to fight a war. Lena turned to face him. You staying? Someone's got to make sure you don't work yourself to death. He almost smiled. Besides, my wife would kill me if I came home now. She made me promise to see this through. They emerged from the mine to find Varen directing the 2 remaining new hires in clearing debris. He'd stripped to his undershirt despite the cold, the bandage around his ribs stark white against tanned skin. The gash had been deep enough to need stitching. Lena had done it herself with shaking hands while Varen bit down on leather and didn't make a sound. We need lumber, Varen said without preamble. Can't rebuild without it. We need a lot of things. Lena surveyed the wreckage. Lumber, tools, food, winter supplies. The list is longer than our money. Then we sell the silver, now, before word gets out about Taggart and someone else decides to try their luck. It made sense. Brutal, practical sense. Lena nodded. I'll take the first load to Sacramento, find a buyer who won't rob us blind. You're not going alone. You're needed here. Someone has to. I'm going with you. Varen's tone left no room for argument. Garrett can manage the mine for a few days. You and I are the targets. If we're gone, the crew's safer. He wasn't wrong. The realization settled over Lena like a weight. They'd become lightning rods for violence. As long as they stayed, danger followed. When do we leave? She asked. Tomorrow. Soon as we can pack the silver for transport. That night, Lena sat by the fire they'd built in the open air, too tired to eat but too restless to sleep. Varen joined her eventually, moving with the careful stiffness of someone whose ribs hurt more than he'd admit. You should rest, she said. So should you. He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. How's your hand? Lena looked down at her left hand, wrapped in bandages that covered burns from a rifle barrel that had overheated during the fight. It'll heal. That's not what I asked. It hurts. Everything hurts. She flexed her fingers carefully. I killed 4 men, Cade. Maybe more. I lost count. I know. Does it get easier? Varen was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. No, but you get better at carrying it. Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be honest. He glanced at her. You did what you had to do. They would have killed you without hesitation.
That doesn't make me feel less like a murderer. Good. The day it stops bothering you is the day you become something worse. Varen poked at the fire with a stick. I've known men who killed without conscience. They don't last. Either someone puts them down or they eat their own gun.
The ones who survive are the ones who remember it matters.
Lena absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. How many men have you killed? Stopped counting at 30. The number should have shocked her. Instead, it just made her sad. What happened to you, Cade, before all this? Nothing worth talking about. Tell me anyway. Varen sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep and painful. I was 17 when I joined the army. Lied about my age. They needed bodies and didn't ask questions. He paused. Did 4 years on the frontier. Fought in skirmishes that never made the newspapers. Saw things that'd turn your stomach. And after? After, I couldn't settle. Tried farming, but every loud noise made me reach for a gun that wasn't there. Tried working as a deputy, but I was too quick to shoot and not quick enough to talk. He threw the stick into the fire. Eventually, I just started drifting. Took jobs that needed a man with no attachments and a willingness to get bloody. Made a name for myself, not a good one. Chen knew your reputation. That's why he came to me when he needed money. Figured I was desperate or stupid enough to take a mining claim as payment. Varen's laugh was bitter. He was half right. Which half? Haven't decided yet. He looked at her, firelight catching in his eyes. What about you? What made a smart woman from San Francisco come to a place like this? Lena pulled her coat tighter. My uncle owned an import business. When my parents died, I went to work for him. Kept his books, managed his inventory, made him a lot of money. She paused. He paid me half what he paid his male clerks. When I asked for fair wages, he said I should be grateful to have a job at all. So you left. So I took everything I'd saved, everything I could borrow, and I bought this claim. Figured if I was going to break my back for pennies, at least I'd be doing it for myself. Your uncle must have loved that. He disowned me, said I'd die out here and it would be my own fault. Lena smiled without humor. Maybe he was right. I've come close enough. But you didn't die. You're still here. We're still here, she corrected. I wouldn't have survived without you. Varen shifted, uncomfortable with the gratitude. You would have found a way. You're too stubborn to die. That's not a compliment. Wasn't meant to be insulting either, just fact. He stood, wincing. Get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow. Lena watched him walk toward his bedroll, moving like every step cost him. Her ribs ached in sympathy. She'd taken a rifle butt to the side during the fight and breathing deep still hurt. They were both damaged, both exhausted, both carrying weight that threatened to crush them. But they were alive. She lay down and stared at stars that seemed brighter without the house blocking them, and wondered when survival had started feeling like victory. They left at dawn with 4 horses, 2 to ride, 2 to carry the silver packed in saddlebags that sagged with the weight of fortune. Garrett and the remaining crew watched them go with expressions that suggested they weren't entirely certain they'd see either of them again. The ride to Sacramento took 3 days. They traveled in tense silence, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the brush. Twice they detoured around other travelers, not wanting to advertise what they were carrying. Once they hid in a ravine while a group of rough-looking men passed within 50 yards. Taggart might be dead, Varen said quietly, but his people aren't. Word's probably spread about the silver by now. You think they'd ambush us? I think desperate men do desperate things, and the territory's full of desperate men. On the second night, camped in a grove of pines, Lena woke to find Varen standing guard despite her insistence that they take shifts. His silhouette was motionless against the stars, rifle cradled like a child. You're supposed to be sleeping, she said. Can't. His voice was flat. Every time I close my eyes, I see Thomas. Kid died because I wasn't fast enough. Lena sat up, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. He died because Taggart sent an army. That's not your fault. I trained him, told him where to position himself. If I'd put him somewhere else, he might have died anyway, or someone else would have. She stood and moved to stand beside him.
You can't protect everyone, Cade. You taught me that yourself. Doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. Lena was quiet for a moment. But he chose to stay. They all did. They knew what was coming, and they stayed anyway. That means something. Varen didn't respond, but his shoulders relaxed fractionally. They stood together in the cold mountain air, two people shaped by violence into something harder and sharper than they'd started as. When this is over, Lena said quietly, what will you do? Haven't thought that far ahead. Try. Varen was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, build something, I don't know what, but something that lasts longer than I do. The mine could be that. Maybe. He glanced at her. What about you? Lena thought about the bright water, about silver veins and burnt houses and graves on a hillside. I want to make it work. Not just the mine, everything. I want to prove that I can build something in a place that tried to kill me for trying. That's a hell of a goal. I've got a hell of a partner. The words hung between them, meaning more than they'd said. Varen met her eyes, and in the starlight his scarred face looked younger somehow, less like a weapon and more like a man. Get some sleep, Lena. I'll wake you for your shift. This time, she believed him. Sacramento rose from the valley like a promise of civilization. Wooden buildings instead of tents, actual streets instead of mud ruts, people who looked like they bathed regularly. Lena had forgotten what a real city felt like. They found a hotel that didn't ask questions and paid for a room with a lock on the door. Varen insisted on sleeping on the floor despite Lena's protests, his rifle within arm's reach even here. The next morning, they met with a silver buyer named Morrison, who operated out of an office that smelled of cigar smoke and old money. He was a fat man with shrewd eyes and hands that shook slightly when he examined their samples. This is high-grade ore, he said finally. Very high grade. Where'd you say it came from? Red Hollow territory, Lena said. The Brightwater claim. Morrison's expression shifted. I heard about trouble out that way. Taggart dead, dozens killed. Territorial marshals asking questions. Oh, we defended our property, that's all. Uh-huh. Morrison set down the ore sample. Look, I'll buy what you're selling, but I want it documented that this was a legitimate transaction. No stolen goods, no questionable provenance. I run a clean business. So do we, Varen said quietly. The threat in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Morrison swallowed. Of course. I wasn't suggesting. He pulled out a ledger. I can offer you $60 an ounce. That's fair market rate. 70, Lena countered. And you know it. They settled on 65. Morrison counted out more cash than Lena had seen in her life. Enough to rebuild, to expand, to breathe without the constant weight of debt crushing her chest. Pleasure doing business, Morrison said, though he looked relieved when they left. Outside, Lena and Varen stood on the wooden sidewalk, surrounded by the noise and bustle of a city that had no idea what they'd survived to get here. We did it, Lena said softly. First part's done. Varen scanned the street with habitual wariness. Now we have to get the money back without being robbed. Can you not worry for 5 minutes? No, Lena laughed despite everything. Come on, I'm buying you a real meal, something that isn't beans or salt pork. The restaurant was nicer than anywhere Lena had eaten in months. They sat at a corner table where Varen could watch the door and ordered steak and potatoes and coffee that didn't taste like it had been boiled with old boots. This is strange, Lena said, cutting into meat that was actually tender. What is? This, sitting in a restaurant like normal people. Like we didn't just bury a dozen bodies and fight off an army. Varen set down his fork. We're not normal people anymore. Probably weren't before, but definitely not now. Does that bother you? Sometimes? He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. But sitting here with you? This doesn't bother me at all. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to name. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks and focused on her plate. We should buy supplies, she said. Lumber, tools, everything we need to rebuild. Tomorrow. Tonight we rest. Since when do you rest? Since my partner decided to buy me dinner. Varen's mouth quirked into something almost like a smile. Seemed rude to refuse. They spent the evening walking Sacramento streets, careful not to look like they were carrying a fortune in cash. Lena bought fabric for new clothes, needles, and thread, small things that felt absurdly normal after weeks of violence. Varen bought ammunition and wire and surveying equipment, his purchases characteristically practical. Back at the hotel, Lena sat by the window while Varen checked and rechecked the door locks. The room felt too warm, too soft, too civilized for what they'd become. Cade? Yeah? Thank you for coming with me, for all of it. He paused in his circuit of the room. You don't have to thank me. We're partners. I know, but I want to anyway. Lena turned to look at him. I couldn't have done this alone, any of it. Varen crossed to where she sat, moving with that controlled grace that somehow made him seem both dangerous and careful. He crouched so they were eye level, his scarred face serious. You're stronger than you think, Lena. You always have been. He paused. But I'm glad I was there. Glad I am here. Me too. The moment stretched between them, charged with something that had been building since the night they'd married. Lena could feel her pulse in her throat, could see the way Varen's eyes darkened as he looked at her. Then he stood abruptly and turned away. Get some sleep. We leave early. Disappointment and relief warred in her chest. Right. Early. She lay awake long after Varen's breathing evened into sleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to untangle what she felt. This had started as a transaction, a marriage of convenience to save a mine. But somewhere between the gunfights and the graves, between teaching her to shoot and standing back to back against an army, it had become something else, something that terrified her more than bullets had. The ride back to the Brightwater took 4 days instead of 3. They traveled with supplies loaded on pack mules, lumber tied to makeshift sledges, everything they'd need to rebuild. It was slow, exhausting work that left no energy for conversation. When they finally crested the ridge that overlooked the claim, Lena pulled her horse to a stop and stared. In their absence, Garrett and the crew had cleared the worst of the debris. The graves were marked with proper crosses. Someone had even started framing a new structure where the house had stood. They've been busy, Varen observed. They've been hopeful. Lena urged her horse forward. Let's not disappoint them. The crew greeted them with cautious optimism that bloomed into genuine excitement when they saw the supplies. Garrett took the lumber count with the careful attention of a man planning something ambitious. Figured we'd build the house bigger this time, he said. More room, better construction, make it harder to burn down. Practical, Varen approved. They worked through the remaining weeks of autumn with desperate intensity, racing against winter's approach. The new house rose slowly, 2 stories instead of 1, with stone foundations and a root cellar that could serve as a shelter if needed. Varen insisted on gun ports in the walls, hidden but accessible. Lena didn't argue. The mine continued producing silver at rates that would have seemed impossible before they'd found the deep vein. They hired more workers, carefully vetted by Varen, men with skills and just enough desperation to work hard without asking uncomfortable questions. As October faded into November, the Brightwater began to look less like a war zone and more like a functioning operation. The new house had walls and a roof. The mine had proper supports and new equipment. They'd even built a small bunkhouse for the crew, insulated against the coming cold. One evening, Lena stood on the porch of the half-finished house and watched Varen work with 2 of the crew to install the front door. He'd shed his coat despite the chill, and she could see the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the careful precision he brought to even this simple task. She thought about the stranger who'd ridden into her yard 2 months ago with a blood-stained contract and hard eyes. Thought about how she'd feared him, resented him, needed him, and somehow through violence and silver and shared survival had started to... Mrs. Varen? One of the younger crew members interrupted her thoughts. Garrett wants to know if you approve the placement for the kitchen stove. Lena followed him inside, shelving the thought before it could fully form. There would be time later to examine what she felt. For now, there was work. The first snow came in mid-November, light flurries that dusted the ground and made everything look cleaner than it was. Lena woke to find Varen already stoking the fire in the completed fireplace, coffee brewing in a pot that hung from an iron hook. Morning, he said. Morning. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him. House is coming together. Almost livable. He poured 2 cups of coffee. Garrett thinks we'll be done by month's end. Just in time for real winter. Lena accepted the cup gratefully. We'll need to stockpile supplies, make sure the crew has enough food and fuel. Already handled. Made a supply run yesterday while you were in the mine. Of course he had. Varen had taken to managing the practical details with the same efficiency he brought to security, anticipating needs before Lena had to voice them. We're actually going to make it, she said softly. Aren't we? Looks that way. I didn't think we would. When Taggart came with his army, when the house burned, I thought that was the end. Varen was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. There were a few times I wasn't sure either, but you kept going, kept fighting. Made me believe it was possible. We made it possible, together. He looked at her then, really looked, and Lena saw something in his expression that made her heart stutter. Before she could name it, voices outside interrupted, the crew arriving for the day's work. The moment passed, but the awareness remained. That night, in the house that was almost finished, Lena lay in the bedroom that finally had a door and walls and thought about the future. For the first time in months, it seemed like something more than just survival. The mine was producing. The debts were paid. They had shelter and food and money in reserve. They had choices. The thought should have been freeing. Instead, it made her anxious, because choices meant decisions, and decisions meant confronting what she'd been avoiding thinking about. What came next for her and Varen? Their marriage had been a transaction, a business arrangement to satisfy territorial laws and protect the claim. But lying there in the dark, listening to him move around downstairs, Lena couldn't pretend it was still that simple. She'd meant what she'd said in Sacramento. She was glad he was here. Glad in ways that had nothing to do with security or partnership or practical necessity. The question was whether he felt the same, and whether either of them had the courage to find out. The answer came 2 weeks later, delivered by a man in a territorial marshal's coat who rode up to the Brightwater looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marshal William Cross was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough corruption to be skeptical of everything. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, and waited for Varen to acknowledge him before approaching the house. Mrs. Varen, he said, touching his hat brim. Mr. Varen, I need to ask you some questions about what happened here in October. Lena set down the ledger she'd been working on. We defended our claim. That's all there is to tell. Ma'am, I've got reports of 40 dead men, property destruction, and enough spent brass to supply a small war. Cross pulled out a notebook. The territory doesn't look kindly on private battles, regardless of who started them. Taggart started it, Varen said flatly. We've finished it. Marcus Taggart is dead. Can't exactly get his side of the story. Cross flipped through his notes. But I've got testimony from some of his surviving men. They claim you ambushed them, murdered Taggart in cold blood. They're lying. Lena stood, anger flaring hot and quick. Taggart sent men to burn us out, to kill us, to steal our claim. We have witnesses. Your employees, who'd naturally support your version. Cross's expression was neutral, but his eyes were shrewd. I'm not saying I don't believe you, ma'am. I'm saying I need more than your word against theirs. What about the law? Lena demanded. We reported the first attack. We told the sheriff in Red Hollow. Sheriff Dawson worked for Taggart. He's been removed from office pending investigation. Cross tucked his notebook away. Look, between you and me, I think Taggart got what was coming to him. But my job isn't to approve of justice. It's to enforce law. And right now, I've got enough complaints to bring charges. Silence fell heavy and cold. Lena felt everything they'd built threatening to crumble. After everything they'd survived, they might still lose to paperwork and paid testimony. What do you need? Varen asked quietly. Evidence? Witnesses who aren't on your payroll. Something that proves Taggart was the aggressor. Cross shifted his weight. I'll give you a week. After that, I have to act on what I've got. He left as deliberately as he'd arrived, and Lena stood on the porch watching him disappear down the valley road. We can't prove it, she said. Everyone who could testify is either dead or worked for one of us. Not everyone. Varen was already moving toward the barn. Bennett ran when we found the money. If we can find him, get him to admit Taggart paid him to sabotage the mine. He'll be long gone. Probably left the territory entirely. Maybe. Maybe not. Varen saddled his horse with quick, efficient movements. Men like Bennett don't go far. They find another town, another mine, another way to survive. And they talk when they're drunk. So what? We just search every saloon between here and Nevada? If we have to. He tightened the cinch and looked at her. You got a better idea? Lena didn't. She saddled her own horse, left Garrett in charge of the mine, and rode out with Varen into the late November cold. They searched for 4 days, moving from town to town, asking questions in saloons and boarding houses, and anywhere else men with guilty consciences might hide. Most people hadn't seen Bennett. Some wouldn't say if they had. On the 5th day, in a mining camp 2 territories over, a bartender with a scar across his nose gave them a lead. Bennett? Yeah, I know him. Comes in here most nights, drinks himself stupid. The bartender wiped down the bar. Talks a lot when he's drunk. About some woman who ran a mine. About silver. About how he should have asked for more money. He here now? Varen asked. Bunks in a tent behind the Lucky Strike claim. Works mucking ore for day wages. The bartender studied them. You law. Something like that, Lena said. They found Bennett exactly where the bartender had said, living in a canvas tent that reeked of whiskey and unwashed man. He was thinner than Lena remembered, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd run from consequences and found them waiting anyway. Mrs. Zhao, he said when he saw her. Then, correcting himself, Mrs. Varen, I heard you married that gunfighter. Lena will do. She crouched at the tent entrance, keeping her distance. We need to talk, Bennett. Nothing to talk about. I did what I did, took the money, ran. That's the end of it. It's not. Varen stood behind her, a silent presence. Taggart's people are claiming we murdered him, that we started the fight. The marshal's bringing charges unless we can prove otherwise. Bennett laughed, a bitter sound. And you want me to testify? Tell everyone I sabotaged your mine for money? Yes. Why would I do that? I'd hang. Lena pulled out a pouch and set it on the ground between them. $500, plus a letter stating you were coerced by threats against your family. You testify truthfully about who paid you and why, and you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Bennett stared at the pouch like it might be a snake. You're offering me money to tell the truth. I'm offering you money to do the right thing. Finally. Lena met his eyes. You helped nearly destroy everything I built. This is your chance to help fix it. And if I refuse? Varen's hand settled on his gun. Then we make sure the marshal knows where to find you. You can explain to him directly why you sabotaged a mine and ran. Bennett's face went gray. He reached for the pouch with shaking hands, felt the weight of it. 500? 500 and safe passage out of the territory, Lena confirmed. But you testify first. In Red Hollow, in front of the marshal, and you tell the truth about all of it. They brought Bennett back bound to his saddle, not trusting him to follow willingly. He complained for the first day, then fell into sullen silence. Lena couldn't find it in herself to care about his comfort. Marshal Cross was waiting when they arrived at the Brightwater, his expression shifting from skeptical to interested when he saw Bennett. This is your evidence? He asked. This is a man who was paid by Taggart to sabotage our mine, Lena said. He'll testify to it, under oath, if necessary. Cross questioned Bennett for 2 hours, taking notes, pressing for details. Bennett, faced with the choice between a noose and $500, talked. He described how Taggart had approached him, how much he'd been paid, what he'd been told to do. He named dates and places and amounts with the precision of a man trying to save his own skin. When Cross finally set down his pen, his expression was thoughtful. This changes things. Substantially. He looked at Lena and Varen. I'll need to verify some details, interview a few more people, but if this holds up, the charges against you won't proceed. And Taggart's people? Varen asked. Will face charges themselves? Conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud. The list is long. Cross stood and tucked his notebook away. You two have made a lot of enemies. Some of them won't stop just because the law is on your side now. We know, Lena said. I expect you do. Cross gathered his hat. I'll be in touch when the investigation's complete. Meantime, keep your heads down and your powder dry. He left with Bennett in custody, and Lena sagged against the porch railing. It's really over. The legal part is. Varen scanned the horizon with habitual wariness. But Cross was right. Taggart's people won't forget. Let them remember, we're not going anywhere. That night, the crew celebrated with whiskey and rough music played on a battered fiddle someone had brought from town. Lena sat on the porch of the finished house, their house, with glass windows and a door that locked and rooms that actually had furniture, and watched men who'd fought beside her laugh like they hadn't recently buried their dead. Varen joined her carrying 2 tin cups filled with whiskey. Garrett's already talking about expanding operations, hiring more men, opening a second shaft. We could do it. The silver's there. Lena accepted the cup. This time last year I was in San Francisco, keeping books and being invisible. Now I'm running a profitable mine in the middle of nowhere. You're not invisible anymore. No, I'm not. She sipped the whiskey, letting it warm her from the inside. What about you? This what you imagined when you took Chen's contract? Varen was quiet for a long moment. I didn't imagine anything, just took the deal because I was tired of drifting. He set his cup on the railing. But this, he gestured at the mine, the house, the celebration below. This is more than I expected. In a good way? In a way that scares me. Lena looked at him, at the scarred face she'd learned to read, the careful distance he kept even now. Why does it scare you? Because everything I've ever cared about, I've lost. My parents, my regiment, friends who didn't make it home. He met her eyes. I learned not to care. Safer that way. But you care now. It wasn't a question. Varen's expression confirmed it anyway. Yeah, I care. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to fully voice. Lena set down her own cup and stood, closing the distance between them until they were close enough to touch. I care too, she said quietly. I didn't want to. This was supposed to be business, a transaction to save the mine. I know. But somewhere between the shooting lessons and the fighting and watching you nearly die defending this place, she stopped, searching for words. It stopped being business. Varen's hand came up slowly, carefully, as if giving her time to pull away. His fingers brushed her cheek, calloused and gentle. Lena, don't. She covered his hand with hers. Don't tell me all the reasons this is complicated. I know them. I've been listing them for weeks. Then what do you want me to say? I want you to tell me if I'm alone in this. If what I'm feeling is... She faltered. If it's just me... Varen's thumb traced along her jaw with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with every violent thing she'd seen him do. It's not just you. It hasn't been for a while. Relief and fear tangled in her chest. So what do we do? I don't know. I'm not good at this. His other hand settled at her waist, anchoring her. I know how to fight, how to survive, but this, being with someone, trusting them not to leave, I'm terrible at it. I'm not much better. I've spent my whole life proving I don't need anyone. Lena's hand settled on his chest, feeling his heart beat steady beneath her palms. But I need you, and that terrifies me. We could keep pretending it's just business, Varen offered, though his grip on her waist suggested otherwise. We could, but I'm tired of pretending. So am I. He kissed her then, slow and careful, like he was afraid she might break. Lena kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion she'd been denying, fear and hope, and something that felt dangerously close to love. His arms tightened around her, and she pressed closer, needing the solid reality of him after weeks of uncertainty. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Varen rested his forehead against hers. This changes things. Everything already changed. We're just admitting it now. Fair point. He stepped back, putting careful distance between them again. But we should probably figure out what this means. For us, for the partnership. Lena laughed, slightly breathless. Leave it to you to want to negotiate after kissing me. I'm practical. You're impossible. But she was smiling. What do you want it to mean? Varen looked at her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and seen in equal measure. I want this to be real. Not a transaction or a business arrangement. Real. It already is real. I mean the marriage. He reached for her hand, the one with the too large ring that had slipped loose countless times. I want to be your husband. Actually, your husband.
If you'll have me. Lena's throat tightened. You already are my husband. Legally, anyway. That's not what I'm asking. She understood. He was asking if she wanted him, scars and violence and damaged history included. Asking if she could build a life with a man who'd killed more people than most soldiers. Asking if she was brave enough to choose him when she didn't have to anymore. Yes, she said simply. I'll have you. All of you. Something in Varen's expression cracked open. Relief and wonder, and a vulnerability she'd never seen from him. He pulled her close again, this time without the careful distance, and kissed her like he was memorizing the shape of her. Below them, the crew's celebration continued, oblivious to the quiet revolution happening on the porch. Winter settled over the bright water with serious intent. Snow piled high enough to make traveling difficult, and the crew moved into the bunkhouse full time. The mine continued producing through the cold months, the deep vein yielding silver that made even Garrett whistle in appreciation. Lena and Varen settled into a new rhythm, working side by side during the day, sleeping in the same bed at night, learning each other's habits and quirks with the same attention they'd once given to survival. It wasn't easy. They were both too stubborn, too used to independence, too damaged by what they'd survived. But they made it work. In January, Marshal Cross returned with final papers clearing them of all charges related to Taggart's death. Several of Taggart's former associates had been arrested for fraud and conspiracy. The sheriff in Red Hollow had been removed. The territorial government had issued formal recognition of the Brightwater claim's legitimacy. You're clear, Cross said, handing Lena the documents. Free and clear, though I'd suggest staying out of trouble for a while. We'll try, Lena said, knowing it was probably a lie. February brought a thaw, and with it, new challenges. A competing claim opened 2 valleys over, and rumors started about rich silver deposits further north. More miners arrived in Red Hollow, transforming it from a rough frontier town into something approaching civilization. The Brightwater thrived. They hired more workers, built additional structures, even started talking about buying adjacent land. Garrett took on more responsibility, essentially running day-to-day operations while Lena focused on finances and expansion. Varen remained vigilant, never quite trusting that the violence was over. He taught the entire crew basic security, maintained weapons, and kept watch with the same intensity he'd shown during the siege. Lena learned not to argue about it. His wariness had kept them alive too many times. Spring came late and hard, melting snow flooding the creek and turning the valley floor to mud. They lost a week of mining work to water in the lower shafts, but Varen organized the crew to dig drainage channels that would prevent future flooding. One evening in early April, Lena stood at the mine entrance and surveyed everything they'd built. The house stood solid against the mountain, smoke rising from its chimney. The bunkhouse was lit with lantern light and the sound of men's laughter. The mine entrance was properly reinforced with new equipment and a cart system that had tripled their efficiency. Thinking loud again, Varen said from behind her. Lena leaned back against him, comfortable with the casual intimacy they'd developed. Just realizing we actually did it, built something that lasts. You did it. I just helped. We did it together. She turned in his arms. I couldn't have survived this without you. You would have found a way. You're too stubborn to do anything else. His hands settled at her waist, familiar and warm. But I'm glad I was here. Me too. They stood together as twilight deepened, 2 people who'd started as strangers brought together by desperation and stayed together by choice. The Brightwater stretched around them, not perfect, not peaceful, but theirs. Cade? Lena said after a while. Yeah? What do you think comes next? More silver, more challenges. Probably more people trying to take what we've built. He paused. But we'll handle it. Same way we've handled everything else. Together. Together. The word felt like a promise, like something worth fighting for, worth building on, worth believing in despite everything they'd survived. Behind them, Garrett emerged from the mine with another cart of ore, already calculating yields and profits. The crew began securing equipment for the night, their voices carrying in the clear mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Lena thought about the woman who'd arrived in Red Hollow 6 months ago, desperate, alone, clinging to a failing mine and fading hope.
That woman felt like a stranger now. The person she'd become was harder, scarred by violence and loss, but also stronger for it. I want to expand, she said suddenly, not just more shafts here. I want to buy other claims, build an actual mining operation. Something bigger than just surviving. Varen studied her face. That's ambitious. I'm tired of playing small, tired of just holding on. Lena gestured at the valley. We proved we can build something here. Let's build something that matters. All right, but we do it smart. Controlled growth, vetted partners, proper legal protection. He smiled slightly. And better security. Always with the security. It's kept us alive this long. Fair point. Lena kissed him, quick and fierce. Then let's do it. Build an empire or die trying. How about we just build the empire and skip the dying part? Deal. They walked back to the house, hand in hand, making plans for a future that stretched beyond the next crisis. For the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Lena could imagine years ahead instead of just days. Could see herself and Varen growing old together, building something that would outlast them both. The path wouldn't be easy. They'd face more challenges, more violence, more people who wanted what they'd created. But they'd face it together, the way they'd faced everything else. Inside the house, Varen built up the fire, while Lena checked the ledgers one more time. The numbers were good, better than good. They'd paid off all debts, had money in reserve, and the mine was producing at rates that suggested years of profitability. We should celebrate, Varen said, appearing with 2 glasses and a bottle of actual decent whiskey they'd been saving. What are we celebrating? Surviving, thriving, take your pick. He poured and handed her a glass. To the Brightwater. To us, Lena corrected, raising her glass. They drank, and the whiskey was smooth and warm and tasted like victory. Later, lying in bed with Varen's arms around her and the sound of wind outside their sturdy walls, Lena allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, there would always be struggle, but the certainty that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. I love you, she said into the darkness. Varen's arms tightened. She felt him press a kiss to her hair. I love you too. Simple words, complicated truth, but real, finally and completely real. Outside, the Brightwater claim sprawled under starlight, every inch of it earned through blood and determination and the stubborn refusal to quit. The mine would continue producing. The empire they'd imagined would grow. And through it all, they'd stand together, partners in every sense of the word. Lena closed her eyes and let sleep come, secure in the knowledge that she'd found what she'd been searching for when she'd left San Francisco, with dreams and desperation in equal measure. She'd found home, not in the land or the silver or the house they'd built, but in the scarred gunfighter who'd ridden into her life with a blood-stained contract and stayed because somewhere along the way, surviving together had become living together, and that was worth more than all the silver in the mountain. The next morning dawned clear and cold, promising spring despite the lingering winter chill. Lena woke to find Varen already dressed, standing at the window and watching the valley with his usual vigilance. See something? She asked. Just checking. He turned and smiled, a real smile, the kind he'd been giving her more often lately. Coffee's ready. They ate breakfast while discussing expansion plans, arguing good-naturedly about which claims to pursue and how aggressive to be in acquisitions. It felt wonderfully normal, this domesticity wrapped around their ambitions. Garrett arrived with the morning report, barely hiding his amusement at finding them both at the breakfast table looking rumpled and content. Morning, Mrs. Varen. Varen. He set down his notes. Crew's ready when you are. Found what looks like another vein branching off the main chamber. Could be significant. Lena's pulse quickened. Show me. They descended into the mine together, her and Varen and Garrett, following lamplight into the earth that had tried to kill them and instead made them rich. The new vein gleamed in the lamplight, a promise of more wealth, more success, more proof that they'd been right to fight for this place. We'll need to shore up the supports before we extract, Lena said, already calculating angles and loads. And I want full safety protocols, no rushing this. Agreed, Garrett said. I'll get the crew started on reinforcements. He left them alone in the chamber, surrounded by silver and possibility. Varen pulled Lena close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat echo in the confined space. "We really did it," she said quietly. "Yeah, we did." They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd survived impossible odds and built something beautiful from the ashes. Then Lena pulled back, kissed him once more, and headed back to the surface. There was work to do, an empire to build, a life to live. And finally, wonderfully, they had the time to do it, together.